Hi there, I'm Lydia and welcome to Typical Books. Today it is a book tag, second tome around. Huge thanks to Alex from Hey Little Thrifter for tagging me in this. I am so excited to see other people's responses too because I enjoyed your video so very much. And I saw that Regina and Merce were also tagged in this, so definitely head over and check out not only the original tag from Hungry Bookworm that tagged a book olive, who tagged Alex, who tagged Merce at Harpies in the Trees, and Regina from Regina's Haunted Library, and me. Second tome around is, oh my god, made for horror book collectors. So I'm so glad that this has found its way onto Horror Booktube because so many of us use used bookstores to finish out our collections, to initially discover horror in the first place, or get those hard to find copies of things that don't really exist, that are only being reprinted thanks to paperbacks from hell and things like that. There's nothing more satisfying than standing in a used bookstore with a horror section, a bona fide horror section. So many bookstores are falling out of favor of horror. So many bookstores are blending horror into general fiction. A lot of bookstores are putting horror thrillers and things like that all together. So the horror section in a used bookstore is such a fantastic and beautiful thing, and it is eerie eye candy. Even though I curate a page of new books, that's sort of the feeling I want to get when people are looking at book covers all the time. That getting that cool, eclectic shopping by visual, letting the book be judged by its cover. I love that about horror novels specifically because some of them are so outlandish or terrifying just to look at. Please like, comment, subscribe, share this video, and let me know what you think of used bookstores. If you're not doing this tag, feel free to leave any comment and even answer the questions in the comments below if you want, and really pique the imagination. So yes, on with the questions. Question 1 is, do you buy secondhand books? I do. I definitely do. For the longest time as a child, we couldn't afford new books very often in our family. So my grandmother, my mother, and I would often all pile in the car, sometimes with my sister too. She was younger though, and go to the used bookstore, Allison the Bookman, which is to this day one of my favorite used bookstores. And they have this like horror section where everything's front faced. It reminds me of Alex's backdrop. So if you are new to Horror Booktube or this is your first time seeing this particular tag, go to She Who Tagged Me at Alex at Hey Little Thrifter and check out her backdrop. Reminds me of that front-facing horror section. So new books were really like a birthday and Christmas thing, or for school you would get new books, but that doesn't really count, right? And then even as an adult, when collecting books became something I wanted to do, I couldn't always afford new books, or I wasn't that keen on collecting. I would sometimes buy a new Stephen King book when it was brand new, but other than that, I wasn't that keen on anyone, and anyone who was writing things I was interested in were either not stocked in the bookstores or it was something that had been out for hundreds of years, so, well, not hundreds, but decades. So the best place to go and get it was a used bookstore instead of going to a bookstore and having them order it in, which sometimes is fruitless. Then, of course, as a young adult, I certainly couldn't afford anything because I all of a sudden had to pay like bills and rent and stuff like that. So yeah, for a very long time in my life, new books were just an impossibility. So used bookstores was where the bulk of my collection came from. For the longest time, everything I had was from a used bookstore, everything, and I would go to them regularly. And still to this day, it's probably only about 30% brand new books. Question 2 is, what is your or was your latest purchase? I like the was in there because I have not been to a used bookstore in quite some time. I do get stuff from like Book Depository or Better World Books, Abe Books, and places like that. But I think the most recent thing was when we went out last at the end of February and picked up some cool finds. Haunted by James Herbert was one of those books. And the Lee Montford book I just reviewed, Horror in the Woods, that was one of those used book finds as well. Question 3 is, what condition do you find acceptable? Tatty or not tatty, etc. And yeah, it depends. I will pick up the tattiest rag if it's something that I need to read, want to read, or if I'm in a rush, or say I'm at a laundromat and they have a bin of $1 books, I'll buy whatever garbage is in there. I would draw the line at a coverless book because if you read the inside flap about buying coverless books and stripped books, what that's all about, so I would actually avoid that entirely. But I've bought some pretty garbagey books before, and I think my saddest thing was my copy of Hell House, which has fallen apart. And I was fairly picky with that, although it's tough to find that in original paperback for me anyway. And it had been terribly creased down the center. And now, after about reading it about 3 times, it has fallen exactly in half. I've cried about this before on the show, but like, I need to replace that book. I'm sure that all the condition of the copies of that book that exist are relatively similar. So they're probably cracked spine books. And that is like the argument for not cracking the spine of a book, is that it was probably only cracked once. I only read it 3 times and kept it gently and carefully. But through time, fluctuations in humidity or whatever, the acid nature of the paper or glue perhaps rotted out that spine and it's fallen in half. So don't crease your books. This is a nice copy of Lucifer's Lottery by Edward Lee that has not a creased spine. And I need to point this out just because it's such a good example of a book that has been through the ringer. I bought this and I've read it twice. I lent it to a horror rock band that took it to Ohio on recording, and every member of the band read the book. And then I lent it to my husband when we were dating, and that was a long distance thing to begin with as well. So it went to a different country and back again and had been read. So it's been read by, and actually when I bought this book, now that I remember, I did go to my hometown and back on the bus, like a Greyhound. So it's been all around, and it doesn't have a cracked spine. So definitely watch who you lend your books to, and be careful of books you've borrowed from people. I don't think this will ever end up on a used shelf because it's just too wonderful. Question 4 is, after you've read said book, do you reread it and keep it, or do you redonate it? And one better that, and I'll gift it. I've definitely bought used books, read them, and gifted them, because if a book does better on someone else's shelf or in someone else's hands than mine, I love gifting books, right? I will often keep a book, maybe not to reread it, but it is something that's bought for my collection, especially if it's in a really good condition. I had stumbled upon a whole bunch of Edward Lee at one point, and that was my Edward Lee collection, and it was all mint, brand new, beautiful stuff, so I definitely kept that. I will sometimes redonate stuff, though. When I'm regularly visiting used bookstores, we'll often have a stack that's kept for donation that we will be definitely bringing in our next inevitable trip to that bookstore. Question 5 is, do you have a favorite place to go when you're looking for secondhand books? Yeah, I do. Definitely Black Squirrel Books here in Ottawa. I've talked about them enough. And from a Dusty Bookshelf, her channel, she often goes to Black Squirrel Books. So it's getting a bit of notoriety here on BookTube. It's a wonderful bookstore. There's other bookstores when we visit the United States or small towns. When we recently traveled in February for a author event, we definitely started looking for used bookstores around. We're just always kind of looking for used bookstores. So anything that kind of emulates that Black Squirrel Books vibe. And that also harkens back to Alison the Bookman in North Bay, Ontario, my childhood bookstore. And nothing quite equates with that particular bookstore for its miles of books feel. There was a highway bookshop up in Cobalt, Ontario that I used to love to frequent, and they had literally miles of books. Anyone that has gone up to Northern Ontario to that bookstore back in the day will remember perusing miles of dusty stacks. Oh, what a bookstore. But yeah, Black Squirrel Books is number 1. And when we visit the United States, there is a store called Second and Charles, which is a behemoth of used books and CDs and music, comics, and toys, or whatever geeky stuff, but mostly books. I have bought so many amazing books from Second and Charles for amazing prices. They're also very, very fair as far as bringing books in. So if you bring something in that is worth a good amount, they will pay for that. So it's not like a very quiet mom and pop used bookstore, which may only pay, $1 or $2 store credit or something per book. They actually look at what the going price is. So I love Second and Charles, but I will again say Black Squirrel Books. I also had some thrift stores near me. There's one I haven't checked out near this area, but I used to live near St. Vincent de Paul, and I don't know if they have St. Vincent de Paul everywhere. It's like a Salvation Army. And they had an amazing selection of books, very, very, very inexpensive. So I do love going to thrift stores, proper thrift stores. But again, Black Squirrel Books. Nothing quite equates with Black Squirrel Books. It's a beautiful store with beautiful people. Oh, and at my workplace, when my workplace is having human beings in the building, there is a perpetual donation sale bookshelf where the books are sold for donations to something. I don't know what, but I've bought books from there for sure. Question 6 is hardback or paperback. Do you have a preference? If I'm on foot and I'm buying books unexpectedly, which happens in the wild, I do want paperbacks because they're easy to carry around. But nothing beats the price and quality of a good mint hardcover that you can find for a few dollars. Nothing quite equates with that sort of holy grail find. Now, in a perfect world, I'd have nothing but hardcover books, but price and necessity, portability, all of those things that make paperbacks so very indispensable is why I have so many of them. I would love to have a full paperback collection of everything, right? And I do envy those that do, and to a certain extent, like all hardcover Stephen King collections. That's a beautiful sight, but I don't really have a preference depending on what is handy when I want to read it. Question 7 is, have you found any real gems? And I'd have to say yes, definitely. Recently, that copy of James Herbert Haunted turned out to be signed, and that is amazing. It has the dust jacket intact and everything. It is basically mint. I don't think it's been read because the spine is not warped at all. It's a fantastic book in great condition. Fantastic find. Now, Chris has a really good eye. He's picked up some amazing stuff for me. A signed copy of a Kathy Koja book or two, and a Robert McCammon book, and I don't know what sort of hunt he went on for those because they were gifts, but those are amazing finds and they were used because they're signed, right? Now, how does that equate with signed copies that you didn't get signed yourself and you're buying them specifically because you're collecting signed editions? They're used, but I mean, are they finds? Because you're specifically looking for that. To find a signed copy in hardcover for a third of its price is a find. I think that's fantastic. This, I think, because of its timing, was a fantastic find because we were just talking about how my husband hadn't read the Gunslinger series at all, not into the Dark Tower series. And so I found this at my work for something like $1 or $2, and it was a little tatty. It's quite beat up. It's very old, but it is the copy that I'd originally read. So I think it's just a beautiful find, even though it's not like something that you would write home about necessarily. But yeah, I'd have to say that James Herbert is the #1 best find of late. Question 8 is optional. Find books on your bookshelf that you can donate. And I'll have to point out right now, we have a Chuck Palahniuk book, Invisible Monsters, that we have 2 copies of. We have a second copy of People Live Still in Cashtown Corners, second copy of Genital Grinder. They are 2 copies of the same book on the shelf. And one I recently bought, Invisible Monsters, I bought by accident because I thought we didn't have it, and it's not as good of a copy. So Chuck Palahniuk's Invisible Monsters, that is the book that is in the bin. To go ahead and tag some people is the final question, and I'm always kind of bulk at tagging, but I'm very interested to see what John at Written in Blood has to say because he has a vast collection, and Roya at RG's Devilship because she has such impeccable taste. I would love to see their answers to this question if they haven't been tagged already. Consider yourselves tagged. It's so relaxing to do a tag from time to time. I feel Second Tome Around is really suited to the horror genre. And I do love videotaping up here. So when it's a tag and I don't have so much, don't need props or anything, then I can just comfortably stand up here. And I do enjoy doing tags up here just for a change of scenery. So I hope you enjoy it too. So thank you very much for watching. Is there an author that you always look for in used bookstores? That's one thing. If I were to add a question to this, it would be, is there a particular author you always look for? Kathy Koja and Edward Lee were mine for the longest time and still kind of are for certain titles. So yeah, if there's anything you need to add to this conversation about used bookstores, definitely let me know in the comments below, or let me know what you're reading right now, or what you think I ought to be reading. Thank you again for watching, and have an ooky, spooky day.